Welcome to the Fantasy Football Brothers podcast. My name is Blake, and I'm here with my younger brother Carson. And it's matchup preview time. While we roll the intro, hit the subscribe button. Drop a like. It won't kill you. Let's go. So we are on to week 5. Carson, go ahead and say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. And week 5, I feel like I'm happy to see that we've gotten some viewership traction in the past 2 episodes or so. And so we'll do our quick recap of our current game prediction records. My lead is extending, or at least staying the same. I don't even remember what my lead was last week, but 34 and 30 for Blake, and 39 and 25 for me. So still a lot of the season left to go, but I do have a lead currently.
Yeah, last week was one of our best weeks in terms of just getting the right calls out there. I went 10 and 6 for the week. You went 11 and 5. Yeah. So that's where you gained.
Only differed on one.
And of course, that was not expected.
Yeah, it was Browns Falcons, right? Yeah, pretty sure that was the game.
Correct.
Yeah, so I guess we can get right into it with Thursday night football, which I'll talk about. Colts at Broncos. Broncos are the favorite, though, but that's mainly because Jonathan Taylor's ankle injury has ruled him out for week 5. Probably the first game he's missed in his NFL career. I know last week he had Is that not true?
Well, it's not only his NFL career, it's all the way through high school.
Wow. So hopefully, Taylor doesn't start getting more injuries. That would be a shame, but the reason you drafted him, and I guess I'll talk to him a little bit, although he doesn't really matter for this game. You drafted him because he was a safer option. You thought he'd be a really safe elite running back, and he hasn't really panned out. He's been kind of a 101 on draft boards dud, but in the past 2 seasons, he's had slow starts and ended very highly. Like, I'm pretty sure he's at the same exact spot he was this far into the season as he was last season, and he ended last season as the RB1. And his rookie season, he started off slow and ended as the RB6. So I don't know why that happens for him, but if history is anything to prove, he could still do pretty well. But in this game, he's going to be out, and Nyheim Hines would be the clear fantasy beneficiary in Taylor's potential absence. He's always kind of been the pass-catching receiving back, so that's great for PPR, and whenever he gets this volume, obviously he flourishes because Blake found this stat. In games where Hines has played 50% or more of snaps, he's averaged 15.8 fantasy points per game. So do you agree that you're plugging him in if you have him?
So, I don't know if I can expect that average because, it was a 12-game sample size throughout his entire career, and there were a few low ones out there. There were a few single-digit ones, and there were some high 20 ones. So what to expect against the Broncos, who have shown themselves, probably outside of last week where they got ran all over. But so far in the season, they've been pretty competent at defending the run, a pretty good defense overall. So I would probably lower expectations on that, 16 number for Nyheim Hines. But yeah, if you have him, I think there's a reason that you have him on your roster. It was an insurance policy, and we don't really know what to expect here. There could be an opportunity for Philip Lindsay to get a revenge game here against the Broncos.
Wow, yeah.
So that's an option. We don't really know because Jonathan Taylor hasn't missed an NFL game yet. So, but I think if you roster a Nyheim Hines, this is your best opportunity to start him and feel confident. Because on any given week, if you started Nyheim Hines, you wouldn't know what to get. At least with this, you're not competing with touches from Jonathan Taylor.
For sure. So the only other Colts player I'll talk about directly is Mo Alley-Cox, the tight end, who had 26.5 fantasy points last week, 6 receptions on 6 targets for 2 receiving touchdowns and 85 yards. Basically, I'm going to say hold your horses if you're running to go get Mo Alley-Cox, because in week 3, tight end Jelani Woods caught 2 touchdowns, so it was a different tight end on the Colts last week that did that, or the week prior. And tight end Kylen Granson, who had 4 receptions in week 4. So they're using these 3 tight ends, so, if you want to put all your eggs in one basket and hope that you get the one that gets the touchdowns, which is not a good strategy, then Mo Alley-Cox is your guy, but that just means he's not. So, yeah, you got anything to add?
I would just say, especially for Jelani Woods in week 3, that was 2 touchdowns on 2 targets. That was like an O.J. Howard type of stat line. from earlier this year. So I would say don't chase touchdowns from tight ends, especially when they seem to be using a committee at that position. So yeah, for me, that's not of any interest. If you need a tight end, there are safer options on your waivers, I'm sure.
For sure. All right, we'll move on to the Broncos, who also suffered a bigger injury for their starting running back, but he will also be out. Javonte Williams suffered a season-ending ACL and LCL tear. That's really horrible for the team. Very disappointing. I think Randy Gregory, the linebacker on their defense, also had a pretty major injury. Not season-ending, I don't believe, but that's also hurts them a lot.
No.
But the Broncos signed Latavius Murray off of the Saints practice squad to join Melvin Gordon and Mike Boone in this backfield. The whole narrative that Mike Boone is going to have a lot of value is really weird. Blake and I were just talking about it before we started recording. I think Melvin Gordon clearly is the guy to have in this backfield.
Yeah,
maybe
Mike Boone is like a special teams guy.
Yeah,
he's not.
If you want,
and every time, sorry, I don't mean to keep stepping over you, but like every time Russell Wilson threw the ball to him, he hit him right in the hands and he dropped it. Like it's just not. He's not the guy. I don't know.
I mean,
why people are advocating for such a big, like, if you have a fab budget, like spend 30%, spend 50% of your fab budget on this guy. No chance. No. Like
you're picking up the handcuff to the prior handcuff, which
right. That's not good. It's a bad situation. I don't know why people are advocating sort of just pounding the table for Mike Boone.
I get that the handcuff being Melvin Gordon now is the clear running back that should take a lot of the workload, so maybe his handcuff will have value, but you're just reaching too far at that point, I feel. So, unless, we'll see what happens in this game, if it's really surprising the usage, but I would be very surprised if it's just not the Melvin Gordon show and then, a little bit of Latavius Murray, a little bit of Mike Boone just to support him, but not through their own value. But yeah, we'll move on to more of the pass catchers in the passing game. Russell Wilson had his best fantasy game of the season, and the Broncos lost to the Raiders. He had 2 passing touchdowns and 1 rushing touchdown, which helped give him a lot of points, as I've said. And Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy each caught 1 of Wilson's passing touchdowns, so that's good to see if you roster either of those wide receivers, because those are the clear pass catchers in this offense. And to me, this is kind of surprising, but Courtland Sutton is pretty quietly the wide receiver 11 on the season, so borderline wide receiver 1. That was kind of surprising to me, but obviously he seems to be the safest target for Wilson, and is doing well in that spot.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I mean, this has been a season of kind of like unpredictability in a lot of ways. We kind of projected who would finish where. Obviously, in our season ranking videos, specifically with wide receivers, I did have Courtland Sutton ranked ahead of Jerry Jeudy by a few spots. Obviously, not as high as wide receiver 11, but inside the top 20. And obviously it's still early in the season. Everything could change. Just ask Javonte Williams. But it's good to see that Sutton. Reports out of preseason were saying that Russell Wilson and Sutton had a good chemistry, and it seems to be showing on the field.
I think he said double-digit scores every week, or at least close to it. Like he's been fairly consistent. It hasn't just been like one big game overshadowing everything else.
Well, I wouldn't doubt it in order to be wide receiver 11 so far. Yeah. So, Sutton's good, and Jeudy, if he can stay healthy, seems to be performing pretty well in this offense as well. So, you want to go ahead and pick this game? I think we're both.
Yeah, we're both picking the Broncos. I think that the loss of Jonathan Taylor for this particular game is worse than what the Broncos are probably having to deal with offensively, at least. I think that Melvin Gordon will kind of fill in, and that, maybe Russ and the gang can ride in Denver. So,
yeah, I think a combination of being at home and all the things that you mentioned there, it's kind of all favoring Broncos for this one. So we're gonna go Denver for this one.
Yeah. So we will move on to the Sunday morning London game. Set your lineups. Don't forget, everyone got screwed over by Alvin Kamara last week. It feels. I think I saw something that 83% of people were starting him in CBS leagues or something like that. So.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. Set an alarm or just... It was weird because there wasn't much news going into the week, into Sunday morning, that he would be inactive. So, maybe just wake up early because it's 8:30 Central.
I mean, when I lived in California, I would set my alarm for 6:00 at the latest on a London game because it's 6:30 kickoff time on the West Coast, and like. you got to be on top of it if you
Yeah.
wanna put your best lineup out there. That's just part of being competitive.
Yep.
So to me, 83%, that's casual.
Yeah, it was surprising to me, but the game is Giants-Packers. Haven't even said that yet, but as you'll see on the screen.
Yeah.
But for the Giants, not a whole lot to pull from because the Giants did their best impression of the Bears in their win against the Bears in Week 4. A lot of that was due to injuries for Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor came in and then was evaluated for a concussion, and I think Daniel Jones was forced to come back in, but only 9 pass completions between the two of them. So, the depleted wide receiver room didn't even get any volume, so there wasn't a whole lot to pull from this game. But Saquon got the volume, of course, because they still had an offense, and he had 31 carries for 146 yards. I guess I'll just add this. Do you think he could be the RB1 by the end of the season if he stays healthy?
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, he's getting the workload like you mentioned. He's involved in the passing game. I mean, there's a very good reason that I tried to, work a trade with you involving Nick Chubb and A.J. Dillon for Saquon, and every reason that you gave back to me of why you didn't want to do that made sense. I mean, we think alike in a lot of ways, and that's what makes it really
the show
tough.
helps with that, of course.
Yeah, but it makes it tough to trade with you because, everything you were saying is well, yeah, he's not wrong. I mean, that's exactly on point.
We'll talk about Nick Chubb more later when we get to the Browns, but there are reasons
because
he's currently the RB1,
Saquon,
so that's probably a sell high candidate potentially, but we'll talk about that more later.
Yeah. So, no, but just to go back on Saquon quickly, he doesn't have anyone to compete with for the touches at running back, and that's just such a major thing. I think Matt Breida's had 5 carries on the season maybe. Jeez. So it's all Saquon. Yeah. And so if he stays healthy, I think he has a really, really good shot of finishing at RB1, especially with the head start that he has on the rest of the field.
All right. Yeah, so we'll move on to talk about the Packers. So I'll talk about 2 pass catchers and the 2 running backs. And so Allen Lazard had 17.6 fantasy points, 6 receptions on 8 targets for 116 yards. He played 96% of snaps. And Romeo Doubs had 13.7 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 8 targets, and a receiving touchdown, 47 yards, and a fumble. Also 96% of snaps. 36 routes run for Lazard, 35 routes run for Doubs. The reason I'm bringing that up is because the third highest routes run by a pass catcher was Robert Tonyan at 21. So it's just clear that these are the 2 guys that you want out of pass catchers for the Packers. I know that Sammy Watkins was injured because he got placed in IR last week. I think Randall Cobb's non-existent. I think Christian Watson, the rookie, might have been injured too, but it seems like he's not getting anywhere near the volume that Doubs has gotten in the past 2 weeks. Okay, so he's just not doing much, so he did play. But you want Lazard and Doubs. Those are the 2 that you want. But I'll ask you, which Packers wide receiver do you prefer having season long between Lazard and Doubs?
So, would you call it a cop-out for me to say neither? Because here's my reasoning. I don't want to have to guess when one or the other is going to be the right play.
Yeah.
I would much prefer, and this is coming from someone who rosters Allen Lazard in our league, I placed him on the trade block, and I'm hoping that someone takes interest in him, sees the numbers he's putting up, and is like, hey, I'll take a shot at this guy. Because to me, I'm not really interested in guessing when I should be playing these pass catchers. Aaron Rodgers just kind of looks lackadaisical out there, to be honest. A lot of missed throws that he should be making. I feel like it's not going to be a big surprise to me if he retires at the end of the season.
Well,
I don't expect Green Bay to make a deep run in the playoffs. I wouldn't even be shocked if they didn't make the playoffs. So. To me, I'm trying to avoid or sell high on these guys if I can, and give another manager in my league the headache of rostering these players.
Yeah, I mean, I rostered Doubs, and I think I'm more excited than probably you are just because of the fact that he's the rookie in this scenario. So it's where is his ceiling? How high could it potentially be? But I definitely know what you're saying. This is you're not super excited about the Packers in general. I know they beat the Buccaneers in week 3, or was that 4? Week 3.
It was 3.
Which people might be like, that's a big win, but the Buccaneers without a lot of their offensive players. So
yeah, no Godwin, no Evans, it was nobody.
Yeah. So hold your horses. I'll talk about the backfield. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. Aaron Jones had 14.5 fantasy points, 16 carries for 110 yards, 3 receptions on 4 targets for 5 yards. He played 62% of snaps. A.J. Dillon played 58% of snaps and got 9.4 fantasy points, 17 carries for 73 yards, 1 reception on 2 targets, 11 yards. So 19 touches for Jones and 18 touches for Dillon. But it seems like Aaron Jones is back to being the better Packers RB to have because he's getting more of the targets. And that wasn't even the case. I think after week 1, we thought A.J. Dillon was looking better. And this is kind of why I was wanting to avoid this backfield for similar reasons to how we're not liking this team. But are you back on board of thinking Aaron Jones is the better Packers RB to have just for that pass catching upside?
Honestly, no. I think that both guys probably at this stage, and I didn't do the notes for this section, but I think that they're probably actually very comparable in targets on the season.
Sure.
I would like to look that up.
I know there were instances where that was true for Dillon. I don't know season long if that's the case. Going into the season, it was definitely expected to be Jones would be the pass catching one between the two. Jones,
Aaron Jones on the season has 17 targets. A.J. Dillon has 14 targets. Yeah. So is there really that much of an edge? Not really. And they seem to be getting used. I mean, you can tell by their snap percentage, they're getting used at the same time more often. You know, their combined snap totals equal greater than 100%. So they're on the field at the same time. It's kind of like a flip of the coin of who gets the ball, who gets the red zone carries. So no, to me, like, and again, I roster A.J. Dillon. I'm trying to move off of him because of this very reason. There's a headache associated with determining if this is going to be the week for this guy. So for me personally, I'm looking to trade both of these players. Like, I don't want any shares of the Packers. I don't want Aaron Rodgers on my team. I don't want any of the pass catchers. I don't want any of the running backs. I just want to I just want to cash in my chips and move on.
That being said, we both picked the Packers.
Go Packers!
We both have to pick the Packers to win this game against the Giants in London.
Yeah, it's an 8-point favorite. Yeah. The Packers are obviously a road game for both teams, but do I really believe in the Giants with a banged-up quarterback and just Saquon Barkley to rely on? I mean, I still believe in the Packers' defense to an extent, and I think, you know, with the combination of all those elements, the Packers are just gonna take this one and bring the Giants to 3-2.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we can move on to the Sunday noon matchups with Steelers at Bills. This will be an interesting first game for Kenny Pickett. They are the 14-point underdogs. But he is now set to be the starter for presumably the rest of the season, as long as he stays healthy. The rookie is. He played 50% of snaps, and he had 3 interceptions, but 2 rushing touchdowns. And as Blake and I talked about earlier, those interceptions, you know, 2 of them were bobbled, you know, attempts at a catch by wide receivers, and one was like a Hail Mary, last-ditch effort at the end of the first half, as you were saying. So don't read into that maybe too much, but he's going against the Bills, so I certainly wouldn't play him this week, but he could be promising because we don't know where his ceiling is again, another rookie, so who knows?
Yeah, to me, I just want to jump in really quick and say, to me, if you only drafted one quarterback, as long as they don't have the same bye week as Kenny Pickett, I'm interested in picking up Kenny prior to this week starting, and obviously not starting him, of course, but seeing what happens, kind of, you know, as a lottery ticket, we'll say, because with this Steelers offense, the talent is definitely around him. Sure. I mean, George Pickens is growing as a rookie. Deontay Johnson, of course, and Najee Harris, and even Pat Freiermuth. Like, the pass catchers are all there. It's just about the offensive scheme. It's just about Kenny Pickett staying healthy and kind of getting integrated into this offense, becoming familiar with those guys. And so, to me, he's like a lottery ticket, like a late round flyer, but we're already in the season. Yeah. So, just advocating for that. Do not start him in this game. If he goes off, you can blame me, but I really don't think it's going to happen.
No chance. I really don't think there is. We'll transition from Pickett to Pickens, as Blake already mentioned. George Pickens had 16.2 fantasy points, 6 receptions on 8 targets, 102 yards. I'm pulling this straight from a PFF article, but Pickens saw a target on 33.3% of his routes in the second half, compared to 28.6% in the first half, and 12.9% over the first 3 weeks. Basically what that means is that Pickett may really like Pickens, which is enticing for people that have Pickens, the rookie, who's had those insane highlight reel catches and kind of some funny quotes about his ability and wanting to get used more. So if he gets this connection with a fellow rookie at quarterback, you could be looking at a steal that you got for Pickens in drafts. But I will say, at the same time, Deontay Johnson saw 4 targets in this game, which is kind of weird. I don't expect it to be the Pickens show over Johnson. I'm just saying that he could get more reliable production. And then Pat Freiermuth led pass catchers with 9 targets, which again, that could be the product of a quarterback that is making safer passes. So yeah, just keep an eye on all those pass catchers. Chase Claypool almost seems droppable.
Oh my God, yeah, like all of his passes, you mean? That guy sucks.
Yeah, so just realized that that's someone we didn't even mention, but that's another person that in the past has been talented. But yeah,
he's had flashes, but he is not a consistent fantasy player. Not someone I want on my roster. And on Sleeper, he's currently rostered in 65% of leagues, which is not a high number, but it should probably be lower.
All right, so move on to the Bills, who I'm sure we're both going to clearly pick to win this game.
Nope, going different on this
one. In Buffalo. But I'll focus mainly on the backfield and Devin Singletary in particular, because Josh Allen threw 1 touchdown pass, and it was to Isaiah McKenzie. We already kind of voiced how fluky we felt that was last week. So that meant like all the other pass catchers didn't have amazing games either, because Josh Allen only threw 1 passing touchdown, which is strange for this offense. But they still got the win against the Ravens, the comeback win. But Devin Singletary, 11.6 fantasy points. He had 11 carries, 4 receptions, a fumble, but played 88% of snaps. I mean, I feel like I've been reading Singletary snap count all year, but that's great volume.
Yeah, and we're moving away from Zach Moss taking touches, which was really frustrating at the start of the season. Singletary showing to have taking on more of the workload now, albeit it's 11 carries, which is not great volume, but he's getting involved more in the passing game. That's reassuring.
That's what
and
he needs.
Being tied to a high-powered offense that does score a lot of touchdowns is also very valuable.
Yeah. Agreed. But I think if he gets more involved in pass catching on a passing offense that we both agree, could be the best offense in the league, arguably, that gives him a pretty high floor just about that usage. I mean, remember how he finished last season, so just getting back into that usage again. But yeah, we're both picking the Bills, as we've already mentioned, and you got anything else to say about this matchup?
I want to quickly say that Isaiah McKenzie could be in the concussion protocol for this game, and Jamison Crowder suffered a fractured ankle, I want to say, so his season's over. And I'm just gonna put out a flyer there for deep leagues, like real deep leagues. Khalil Shakir, rookie slot wide receiver. Take a flyer on him in your deepest of leagues that you're desperate in, and also might be a sneaky DFS play. So I'll just say that.
I've heard, I don't even know the player's first name. I've heard the receiver Kumaro has been involved, and I think Jake. He also got injured. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're really rostering, or more likely if you're really starting anyone besides Diggs and Davis as pass catchers, maybe Knox, but he hasn't been doing amazing either. But yeah, I mean, keep an eye on those players for sure, especially in deep leagues. All right, we'll move on to Chargers at Browns. For the Chargers, I'll start with Austin Eckler because after one big game, Eckler is the RB3 all of a sudden. He had 34.9 fantasy points on 19 touches and 3 touchdowns. Sell high? Question mark?
I don't know how you can, to be honest. With where Eckler went in drafts, and also how the running back position has been so unpredictable this season, what you're more likely to do, I think, is hang on, hold on tight, and ride this pony as long as it can go. Because to me, Austin Eckler was a player that I was kind of lower on season long because of that touchdown regression from last season, scoring 20. He scores 3 this past week, and I think that's obviously not going to be more to come, but in terms of a 3-touchdown, multi-touchdown game like that, But no, I don't see how you sell high on Eckler because what are you going to
Yeah.
get? Like, I mean,
True.
with how he has been inconsistent to start, he's been inefficient on the ground. No, I think you have to kind of roll with him. I mean, you drafted him towards the middle of the first round. I think you have to kind of just stick with it.
He could have been the third running back off the board. Like, there are leagues that he definitely
Could
was
have,
drafted
yeah.
like that. So he's actually at his value currently. So I see what you mean.
There you go.
Keenan Allen is considered day-to-day with his hamstring injury, last I checked, which has kept him out since week 1. So maybe return to normalcy once he comes back. But Gerald Everett seems to have stepped up a little bit. 17.1 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 6 targets, and a receiving touchdown, 61 yards. Obviously, the touchdown really helps his day, but he is getting involved. But Mike Williams scored 19 fantasy points. He obviously is the surefire pass catcher you want in this offense when Keenan Allen is out, and should still be very valuable. Like, he was drafted even when Keenan Allen is there, although he is kind of a boom or bust player. But we kind of expected someone like Josh Palmer, wasn't it, to step up, but no one besides Everett and Williams and Eckler did anything really in this game.
Those are the 3 pass catchers.
Yeah, exactly. Eckler is the wide receiver 2. He's honestly ahead of Everett with how they use him in a pass catching sense. But yeah, so when Keenan Allen comes back, I would just expect a return to normalcy, and that probably will hurt Gerald Everett unless he just keeps on getting touchdowns. But we can move on to the Browns. Another highly ranked running back, Nick Chubb, the RB1. But as we've already kind of alluded to, the reason, if you can sell high, he's a little bit more realistic of a chance to sell high on him than Eckler.
It's all tied in on touchdowns.
Yes, scored 5 rushing touchdowns in the past 3 weeks. Week 1, he didn't do a whole lot because I think he rushed for about 100 yards and did nothing else, and that's not great when you don't get touchdowns.
In PPR,
yes.
Yeah.
But whenever he gets those touchdowns, which is not sustainable because he would...
It's hard to predict.
Yeah, it is. So, I'm not saying Nick Chubb is trash, but he's in over his head right now as the RB1. He's a brilliant rusher, but for PPR fantasy, it's really hard to match him up against those other players that get those consistent receptions that he doesn't get. And he also has Kareem Hunt breathing down his neck that takes a lot of those receptions. So...
I know, it makes you wonder what he could accomplish if he had, 85+% of the snaps.
Yeah. Like he'd be a Derrick Henry.
Record breaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that being said, if you can attempt to sell high on Nick Chubb, I think it's a good option. But I also think that, with how running backs are looking so far this season, that really good running backs are hard to come by. And sticking with the guys that are performing well might benefit you in the long run.
Let's talk about the pass catchers, because this was a weird one. Just whenever we were parading Amari Cooper the past 2 weeks or so, he led the team in routes run, but had 1.9 fantasy points, 1 catch for 9 yards. Ouch.
Yeah. Yeah. Just when you thought you could trust
I think it's fluky, but still weird.
Yeah. So I'll say this. I think in terms of time of possession, the Falcons kind of dominated this game in week 4. And so that makes for the volume in this game to be a little bit lower than expected.
Yeah.
If I have Amari Cooper, obviously I was not advocating for drafting him because of the situation that he found himself in this offseason. But if you have him, you likely should continue to start him.
Yeah, at least as a flex.
Well, yeah, and I think this is going to be a better week for him. I'm sure the Browns will not be able to run all over the Chargers. I could be wrong, but I think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more than they did last week, and so I do expect Cooper, because the reality is that there is no one on this offense other than Amari Cooper that's getting a lot of the targets and a lot of the touches in the passing game, and so I'm more than likely going to roll him out if I have him.
More positive news for a pass catcher was that David Njoku had 9.7 fantasy points, which is decent. 5 catches on 7 targets for 73 yards, and a rush for -6 yards and a fumble. So those were probably 2 bad plays for him. But, other than that fumble and that negative yardage rush, it would have been a tight end that gets double digits without a touchdown. That's so hard to come by. Led the pass catchers in snaps. I mean, I think he's worth picking up off the waivers, at the very least. like we talked about last week, because he's getting the volume. But we'll continue to see if he can stay somewhat consistent. I can't believe we're talking about a player that got 9.7 fantasy points and being excited, but that's just the art of tight ends.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go ahead and pick this game.
Yeah.
We are both taking the LA Chargers on the road as the 2.5-point favorites.
Yep. And I feel like, especially if Keenan Allen is back, but, this offense is very, very, very good. And I expect them to be able to do better than some of their performances in the past few weeks, especially if Keenan Allen returning.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that Myles Garrett probably won't play in this one either.
That is important.
We didn't really mention it because it's a defensive player, but involved in that car accident recently, and hoping for his quick recovery, because he is one of the best pass rushers in the league by far.
All right, we'll move on to the next game, which is Texans at Jaguars divisional matchup. Used to think that this could be like a trash shoot of a game, but Jaguars are playing great, and the Texans are, having some decent performances too. But yeah, I'll just say it right now, overview. I think the Jaguars are going to win this, and we both say that, but we'll talk about that more at the end. But Dameon Pierce, at 25.
Way to spoil it.
Oh, how about you take over? You did these notes.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about Dameon Pierce. I was just thinking you would take him over, but
no, go for it.
Dameon Pierce, 25.9 fantasy points, very efficient on the ground, 14 carries, 131 yards, and a touchdown. And how about this for a PPR stat? 6 catches on 6 targets for 8 yards. All right.
That is a PPR
That's 6.8 points. We'll take that all day. We'll take that. 6.8 fantasy points all day. 8 yards, who gives a rip?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. A season-high 68% of the snaps for Pierce in this game. Had 9+ yards per carry with the aid of a 75-yard touchdown run. You always love to see that. And back-to-back weeks with a rushing touchdown. I think that this guy, if you drafted him at this point, he's probably locked into your lineup, especially at, we keep talking about it, but the state of running back this season so far, it's hard to come by a consistent guy. Dameon Pierce is getting all the running back touches on this team, and the Jaguars, albeit is a difficult defense, a difficult matchup, but this offense kind of seems to run through Pierce at this moment, and so I'm advocating for him as a starter.
Yeah, I think we were skeptical of him because of lack of touches in college and what Burkhead potentially was taking from him, but 20 touches in this game.
Look at week 1. Yeah, exactly.
That's what's making him seem legit.
Yeah, and then a guy that I would advocate for keeping an eye on, or, kind of a speculative ad, a grab and stash, we'll say, is Nico Collins. 11.2 fantasy points. He got 5 targets, caught 3 of them for 82 yards. Played a season-high 79% of the snaps, which you like to see. Seems to be kind of emerging as the number 2 in this offense, and actually led the team in receiving yards in week 4.
Wow.
So he's only rostered, as of writing the notes, he was rostered in 21% of leagues on Sleeper. I'm going to give you a live update of that right now. And anything else you'd like to add to this, Carson?
No, not really. I mean, I'm sure that Brandon Cooks is just quietly putting up double digits as far as I know, but, he...
Okay, yeah, let's do a where are they now, since you mentioned it. Brandon Cooks has gotten 2 games above 15 fantasy points, 2 games below 10, so not great there. Nico Collins, on the other hand, only rostered in 23% of leagues, so a 2% bump over the waiver period. Go pick him up. I'm serious. This guy is growing in this offense, and that's something that in a team that doesn't really have a lot of pass catchers, that's valuable.
For sure.
So let's go ahead and move on to the Jaguars here. I'm not going to take too much away from this game against the Philadelphia Eagles. They're the only remaining team that's undefeated. Philly looks like one of the favorites to make a deep run in the playoffs in the NFC. And Trevor Lawrence, man, it was a wet one out there, and it really showed in his ball control, because he turned the ball over 5 times, including, get this, 4 fumbles. Wow. So that is not favorable. Only had 11 completions on the day, so very low volume for all of the pass catchers in that team. And then Zay Jones missed that game with an ankle injury. Monitor his status. He showed some promise back in week 3, made him a hot waiver wire pickup. And I think he's a flex consideration if healthy, especially given the matchup.
Yeah, all those people that watched that episode last week, he did get up coolly, remember? I hope you all appreciated that clip. But I'm excited to see what Zay Jones can continue to do, because we talked about him and then he didn't play. So interested to see what he can continue on going forward. But yeah, as already mentioned, we're both picking the Jaguars.
Yep, go Jags.
All right, I'll let you talk about Bears and Vikings too, another divisional matchup.
All right, so looks like Justin Fields saw what Trevor Lawrence did and said, hey, I can do that too. Only had 11 completions in that game. And here's what we'll say. All of his best games last season as a rookie came when he had 27 or more pass attempts. Thus far, he has averaged less than 17 pass attempts per game. So
Ouch.
There is still a long ways to go before Justin Fields is usable in fantasy, and his pass catchers are usable in fantasy. You can't trust any of them right now. That being said, Darnell Mooney did have a good day, finally. 13.4 fantasy points. I know we're celebrating over a low teens scoring game, but this guy was horrible, completely unusable prior to this game. And if you started him last week, I think you've been living under a rock because you should have had him on your bench.
Probably drafted your team and then never said it.
Right, caught 4 balls, and if you're one of those people, you're not even listening to this, so I don't know what I'm saying.
True,
but Darnell Mooney caught 4 balls on 5 targets for 94 yards. Obviously, a 56-yard catch helps inflate that total, but he is worth stashing if you can afford to keep him on your roster. But the value is directly tied to Justin Fields getting more pass attempts out there, so that's something to monitor. Moving on to the running backs. David Montgomery with an ankle and a knee injury. We're going to continue to monitor his status for this week. Minnesota ranks 23rd in rushing yards allowed per game, so not a scary matchup by any means. And I think that would even be higher if in last week's London game, Alvin Kamara had been healthy. So I think that's a bit of a kind of a sneaky stat. I think it's a little misleading. I'm saying it's a good matchup for the Chicago backfield, and if Montgomery is inactive again, Khalil Herbert should be started.
For sure. Clear handcuff that does very well in the absence of Montgomery.
Yeah, and then on to the Vikings. Dalvin Cook, 10.6 fantasy points across the pond in London, 20 carries for 76 yards, and 2 catches on 2 targets for 10 yards. He had a goal line touchdown vultured by Justin Jefferson, of all people. And getting running back 1 volume, but underperforming generally, I'm advocating for Dalvin Cook to be a buy low candidate, because this is a guy that went towards the end of the first round, obviously is a top 10 back when he is healthy and producing, and thus far, considering he's getting the volume, I think it's more likely than not that he gets right towards the first half to the later half of the season. I'm advocating for buying low.
I 100% agree. I mean, he's been drafted as an elite RB1 in previous drafts and previous seasons, and he's getting 22 touches. So pounce on that, 10.6 fantasy points. That manager probably isn't super excited about that for their potential RB1. I would pounce on that. I agree. Buy low.
Cool. So we're both picking the Vikings in this one, keeping with the theme of picking together.
Yep.
But it's really hard to pick the Bears on the road when they just don't throw the ball, and that's how you win games in this league. So we're gonna go ahead and move on, and I believe this is back to your notes. So go ahead.
Yeah. So Lions at Patriots. Kind of surprised that the Patriots are the favorite in this one, but they're home.
Yeah,
baby. That more at the end, but DeAndre Swift, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and DJ Chark were all inactive in Week 4, so this was kind of a weird one for the team. Keep an eye on all those players. I don't think they've officially been designated out or in yet, so just keep an eye on all of them. But Jamal Williams had 23.9 fantasy points, 19 carries for 108 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, and even a catch for a yard. He's the RB6 with 6 rushing touchdowns on the season, so that probably shows how I feel about this next question, but Williams is too risky to play in games where Swift is active, correct?
Yeah, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
When DeAndre Swift was healthy and Jamal Williams was vulturing him at the goal line, it was really just more unfortunate than anything. It's not something that you can that you can look at and say, oh, okay, so Jamal Williams is the guy that's getting the touchdowns on the offense. I'm going to go ahead and play him. It's really not that simple. DeAndre Swift, when he's healthy, kind of commands that backfield, and Jamal Williams just happens to find his way into the end zone. It's more fluke than anything. And so, when we advocate for Jamal Williams, it's only whenever DeAndre Swift is inactive. And it looks like that's going to be the case. There's been, like we talked about it last week, there's been speculation that they're going to keep Swift through the bye week inactive so that he can have a chance to recover and be healthy for the remainder of the season. But if Jamal Williams is healthy, obviously he's getting the volume, he's getting the workload, and that is what you look for from a fantasy running back. So, good question there.
You're starting if Swift is out, but again, everything you've just said, he doesn't have the floor to safely be played if Swift is there. But Jared Goff, oh my gosh, 33.22 fantasy points. He threw 4 passing touchdowns for 378 yards. The QB5 in 6-point passing TD league, so that may be a little bit different in your league, but still nonetheless very, very good, way higher than he's being drafted. 51% rostered in Sleeper. I mean, is he worth picking up?
God, I would love to. Actually, I wouldn't love to say yes. No, I don't. I don't trust Jared Goff, and I'm trying to get his ranking in my ESPN league, which uses 4 points. He's also position rank 5, so no change there. But I don't know. Here's the thing: the Lions' defense is so bad that they're averaging more points allowed than points for, and their points for, like, every game the Lions have played, they've scored over 30 points.
I think they're leading the league in points for, and they are like 1-3.
And probably points against. So
it has to be.
They're a hot garbage defense. It reminds me of the Drew Brees days in New Orleans, where they had no defense and every game was a shootout. I don't know if Jared Goff is half the player that Drew Brees was, but here's the thing: I'm not comfortable starting Jared Goff. If you are, go for it. But I would say that this matchup is not the one to do it on, personally.
Sure, I think that's fair. Maybe worth an ad, but you may be a little ambitious to go start him in your lineup unless something catastrophic has happened to your starting QB. But TJ Hawkinson,
right?
He woke up in the absence of all those pass catchers. 39.9 fantasy points, 8 receptions on 12 targets, 2 receiving touchdowns, 179 yards. I guess I'll also talk about Josh Reynolds just to show that, the 2 active pass catchers just did amazing because of that Jared Goff stat line. Josh Reynolds, 21.1 fantasy points, 7 receptions, 8 targets, 1 receiving touchdown, 81 yards. So I'll say right now, I don't believe that Reynolds has games like this where St. Brown and Chark are healthy, but do you think that Hawkinson has proven himself that, hey, I need to command targets like I've kind of had in the past, and that he's going to be more reliable going forward?
So I really think it's more, and not that his targets were bad before this, 7, and then 4 through the first 3 weeks. But I think it's more symptomatic of the fact that St. Brown and Chark did miss this game.
Yeah.
Now, I would advocate, honestly, like, considering how Hawkinson was performing through the first 3 weeks, maybe you picked up Tyler Higbee or Gerald Everett or one of those guys, and you're interested in selling high on Hawkinson. I would advocate for that because you're not going to get a better game from him than this.
Correct.
And I think more often than not, he's going to be the 3rd option, the 4th on some weeks. I think honestly you should probably try to use this game to your advantage and pivot off of TJ Hawkinson, because there have been some kind of sneaky tight end ads on the waivers that are performing, well enough. Double-digit points without a touchdown, which is kind of what we look for from tight ends, as you mentioned before. So that's what I would do if I roster TJ Hawkinson. I'm not really convinced that, given the circumstances, that this is going to be more to come. Certainly not to this degree.
I completely agree, because St. Brown has been amazing when he's played, and Swift takes a lot of those valuable short receptions that are so valuable for PPR that Hawkinson isn't getting. But we'll move on to the Patriots. Bailey Zapp, a rookie?
Zappy.
Is it Zappy? I thought I heard Zapp, and I said Zappy. I don't even remember. Bailey Zappy.
It's Zappy.
Believe he's a rookie. Is that correct?
Yes.
Had 10 pass completions, so I'm really not going to talk about pass catchers. And
it's a Mac Jones impression.
yeah, that's what it is. And Jacoby Myers also wasn't even there. So, yeah, let's just talk about the backfield, which we do every time. Damian Harris, 15.4 fantasy points, 19 touches, and a touchdown. 45% of snaps.
Yeah, buddy.
Ramondre Stevenson, 55% of snaps. So it's just literally one or the other. 12.9 fantasy points. 18 touches, but 4 of those were receptions. It's back-to-back games with 4 receptions on 5 targets for Stevenson. Can you start both? That's my question.
Against this opponent, yes.
Okay.
100%.
But season long, because I think that's kind of more relevant, because I do agree against this defense for sure. But more season long.
So here's how I view it. Damian Harris has the better opportunity on any given game to score a rushing touchdown. Ramondre Stevenson on any given game has more upside in the passing game. So the reality, and it's been this way for a long time, that New England running backs often exist in a committee form.
Yeah.
So
it's Chubb and Hunt.
I like both of them.
I'm looking at Chubb and Hunt right now.
Sort of. I mean, that's a bit generous for Damian Harris and Stevenson. Honestly, I think they're both blushing at that comparison. But no, but I will say this opponent, I'm licking my chops if I am these running backs, and I think they're both going to have a good game, similar to how they did last week.
I think I'm going to disagree with you on the game prediction. I think I'm taking the Lions in this one.
Yeah, I am. I'm going with my Patriots on this one. I can't deny it. That I don't think that Bill Belichick is going to allow 30-plus points out of the Lions.
That's fair.
This week. I mean,
I am taking the underdog according to the spread, and I definitely see what you're saying, but there's something within me that wants to lose a point in my lead.
Hey, I would be all for it. I need it at this point.
All right, we'll move on to Seahawks at Saints. I wasn't going to make this direct comparison, but now that we're here, Geno Smith has almost been better statistically on every category than Russell Wilson this season.
I'm giddy that you're making this comparison.
Well, guys see it all over Twitter and just social media in general. I mean, Geno Smith, 31.7 fantasy points. A lot of that was thanks to height and rushing yardage and a rushing touchdown. But
yeah, maybe Russell Wilson should try that more often.
I mean, that helped him have a good week this week. He got the rushing touchdown. So maybe he was inspired by Smith's performance, even though they probably played it like I think Wilson played after. No, same time. Who knows? Doesn't matter. I
couldn't even follow that. I don't know what you were saying. But
I was saying Smith maybe inspired Wilson.
Sure. They get it.
But Smith, I mean, he supported 21.9 fantasy points for Metcalf and 13.1 for Lockett, both without catching a touchdown. That's what you like to see. As we've always said, Metcalf is the safer option between him and Lockett, but if Smith keeps on being this efficient, they're both starting in your lineups, or at least they should be.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I mean, we talked about DK and Lockett being players that you should be starting based on opportunity, but the problem is that we didn't really know how this offense would look with Geno Smith at the helm. And although we got a small sample size of it the last season when Wilson was hurt, that being said, I'm not convinced that Geno Smith is the guy. Meaning in this matchup against the Saints, I'm not trusting Geno Smith as my starter.
Sure.
And the same thing with Rashad Penny. I think it was really more that the Lions defense is just one of the worst.
Whoa. First ballot Hall of Famer. Let me talk about him. Rashad Penny.
Yeah, go for it.
28.7 fantasy points, 17 rushes for 151 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns and a catch for 6 yards, 69% of snaps. Big game. And we see him do this sometimes when he's healthy. I mean, this is the longest stretch it's been healthy, it feels. But as Blake said, it was against the Lions.
Yeah, it is against the Lions, and then you're going over to the Saints, who are historically a good run defense. I think that it's kind of clear that these Seahawks players were elevated because of the opponent that they played last week. I'm expecting, basically I'm taking the under on all of these points. I mean, and that's not really that bold to say. against the Saints this week. And so before we talk about the Saints, let's go ahead and just confirm. I mean, we're both picking the Saints to win this game at home.
Yeah.
It's just
expect them to bounce back from their ball bouncing on the the field goal frame in London.
Off the crossbar and the
That was
post.
crazy. Yeah, I think they're going to bounce back from that. And yes, they are a much stronger defense, especially against the rush, than the Lions are. That kind of goes without saying.
Well, and you got to keep in mind too, just to mention, I mean, and you have it here. Jameis Winston, Michael Thomas, and Alvin Kamara were all inactive in week 4. So
keep an eye on all of them. But any of them returning is an upgrade.
Even if, any of them returning is an upgrade, like and a problem for Seahawks. So, let's talk about the rookie.
Yeah,
real quick.
Chris Olave, 16.7 fantasy points, 4 receptions on 7 targets, and a receiving touchdown, 67 yards with Andy Dalton at quarterback. I think you're starting him.
I mean, obviously
at flex.
Yeah, no, you're
for sure.
I think you're definitely flexing Chris Olave. He's like 200 yards ahead of second place in air yards in the whole NFL. So that's kind of crazy. Yeah. And it makes me feel good because I talked about for our week 1 preview saying that, Chris Olave, given the type of player he is in this offense, I think he's going to be the downfield guy. And man, I couldn't have been more right because 200-yard edge on the next best air yardage in the league is pretty insane. Yeah. So, I like Chris Olave. He's playing really well as a rookie. Caught a touchdown in this last game, which you love to see. And just an exciting young player. That's something that the league always loves having.
Yep. And I'll let you take back over as we move on to this next game. Dolphins at Jets.
Yeah, so this is a division matchup as well. We do know that Tua, with his concussion and his general mismanagement by the Dolphins organization.
No kidding. I don't even think we're really going to get into that, but that has just been horrible.
It's not a hot take, but it's still worth mentioning. He has been ruled out for week 5. We're hoping that he recovers and is out there in an appropriate time span and healthy and all the good stuff about him. So that being said, Teddy Bridgewater, Teddy Two Gloves, is the starter at the Jets this week. And, among backup quarterbacks, I would argue he's probably one of the most competent. I mean, he's had starting jobs at many teams in his career. And so, like, Carolina, Denver, the Saints for a short period, Minnesota, like, he's been a starter most of his career. So to find himself as a backup on the Miami Dolphins, which have fantastic wide receivers, it's a pretty good spot for Teddy Bridgewater. He filled in relatively well once Tua left in week 4. I'm not starting him unless I absolutely have to, which would be a 2-quarterback league. There's no bye week, so it's kind of hard to advocate for him. But I don't know. That being said, as I'm singing him praises, I'm still not starting him. But mostly just anticipating that lower expectations a little bit for the pass catchers, but you're still starting those guys. But I want to talk about the running backs briefly here.
I have them both.
I know. I know. Well, that's not the backfield to be invested in, I would say. Raheem Mostert, 10.1 fantasy points, played a season-high 72% of the snaps, which, if you're a Chase Edmonds manager, that's a yikes. If you have to start a Miami running back, Mostert's the guy. Got 15 carries, caught a couple passes on 3 targets. Nothing exciting, nothing sexy. And then Chase Edmonds, 10 fantasy points, but it was bailed out on a touchdown. He was super inefficient, basically 1 yard a carry, and a season low 28% of the snaps. He's touchdown dependent flex, like I mentioned last week. The usage is alarming, and people say follow the money. This guy was paid the most in the offseason. He should be getting all the touches. It's not looking that way. So if you can afford it, bench Chase Edmonds. That's what I'm advocating for.
I really didn't expect to be forced to have Jeff Wilson as my RB2 in week 5 of the season, but here we are. We'll talk about him later. But
see, all the more reason you should take my offer for Chubb and Dylan.
Nope.
But let's go ahead and get back into it here with the Jets. Zach Wilson went 18 for 36, 252 yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, also caught a touchdown and hit a clean gritty.
That needs to be bonus points.
Yeah, maybe in custom scoring leagues. But I'll say this, that's the nice thing I'm going to say about Zach Wilson, because if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, I'm not a big Zach Wilson fan, and that's putting it lightly. Here's the thing: the Jets averaged 51 or more, over 51 pass attempts per game with Flacco. So getting 36 from Zach Wilson, it's going to bring the pass catchers' numbers down pretty significantly. That's a pretty big drop. So moving on to the running backs, Breece Hall seems to be the guy. 15.8 fantasy points, had a close call with his touchdown. It was almost knocked out of his hands before he crossed the goal line, but managed to get it in before, and that counts all the same. So a season-high 66% of the snaps for Hall. That's good to see. Also 6 targets in Zach Wilson's return. Also good, promising involvement in the passing game for this team. On the other hand, Michael Carter, this guy's falling off fast. Yeah, 4.9 fantasy points. Did manage 11 touches in this game, which you'd think is okay, but when you're carrying the ball 9 times and getting 15 yards on the other end, that's not going to get it done. I'm advocating for benching Michael Carter moving forward. He's losing touches to the rookie, and it was really only a matter of time, but it's happening, I think, sooner than some people expected. Now transitioning back to the pass catchers here, I want to talk about Corey Davis. I'm going to talk about all of them quickly, but Corey Davis is the one, and I know you already, you have something against Corey Davis.
For years I've had something against Corey Davis, but continue. Nothing personal.
18.4. No, it's not, but it's about how he plays on the field. 18.4 fantasy points, 7 targets, 5 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. He is quietly wide receiver 26 through 4 weeks. And now with Zach Wilson at quarterback, should Davis be a flex consideration moving forward?
No. I think if you want to pick him up, he's burned me so many times in the past, so I don't want to pick him up. But it's worth rostering just for the fact that he's a top 26 wide receiver. But with Zach Wilson as your QB and you're unexpectedly outperforming the rest of the pass catchers on your team, those two things don't add up to me wanting to start him at flex. That's how I feel.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I mean, obviously, if you're desperate, I think Corey Davis does offer upside. But I was advocating for kind of fading all of these pass catchers until we saw what happened when Zach Wilson returned. Now we have 1 game to go off of, and Corey Davis is the leader in receiving. And so, kind of take that for what it's worth. I think he does deserve to be a speculative add. Let's go ahead and move on to Elijah Moore, the second-year player. Has some history with Zach Wilson, sort of. More so, obviously, than Garrett Wilson. But 8.5 fantasy points for Moore. 4 consecutive single-digit fantasy weeks. You got to bench him until further notice. He couldn't get it done with Joe Flacco. He hasn't gotten it done with Zach Wilson. It's just not happening for him, and it's really disappointing considering where he was going in drafts.
But no kidding.
So
he's been someone
not a lot to add there.
He's been someone that people had high hopes for and drafted him kind of near the end of the round, end of the draft, just because this offense was going to be a little bit unpredictable. But it's showing to be the negative side of that unpredictability, and that really is disappointing for Elijah Moore, who looked promising for a good stretch of the season last year as a rookie.
Yeah. Then Garrett Wilson, 6.1 fantasy points, had 6 targets, only caught 2 of them for 41 yards. Didn't seem to be on the same page with his quarterback in that, and I think that comes from a lack of just game time together. So I expect that to improve as Zach Wilson gets reintegrated with the offense. But Carson, I'll ask you, and I think I know the answer, but just for the viewers and listeners, are you benching Garrett Wilson until the chemistry improves?
I think you have to. I mean, 2 catches after what he's done in the previous 4 weeks, and what has changed? Zach Wilson. So you need to see it from Zach Wilson before you can be confident.
Yeah, the way I view it is that Garrett Wilson kind of popped up and was kind of unexpected in Joe Flacco's time, And so it's like, oh, hey, this is like a flex-worthy guy. And now that Zach Wilson's back, it's like, oh, it kind of reset the player to an extent. And so take the good with the bad. You had him for a week, and he was good. If you started him that week that he broke out, kudos to you. I mean, it turned out right, even though I think going into the week that was not the right call. But regardless, yeah, I think with where you drafted Garrett Wilson, you can afford to place him back on your bench. Hopefully you didn't blow up your team expecting that you had a superstar for the rest of the year and traded some talent away. But yeah, with Garrett Wilson, I'm benching him until the chemistry improves, until he kind of proves that he's a valuable asset to this offense with Zach Wilson. Now, with Tyler Conklin, this is the one guy I'm making an exception for. 8.2 fantasy points with no touchdowns, so you can kind of tell how that went for him. A lower passing volume with Zach Wilson at quarterback does lower Conklin's value, but tight end is so desolate that, obviously I'm not going to blame you for chasing upside elsewhere, but I'm okay giving Conklin another chance in a game where I expect the Jets to be playing from behind for the majority of it. That being said, I think we are both probably picking the Dolphins to win this one. Am I right in that?
Yeah. The Jets did win last week, which I was surprised about against the Steelers because I didn't think that Zach Wilson could do it. But no, they're not going to do it against the Dolphins, even though, as we've said, without Tua. But as we've also said, Teddy Bridgewater is definitely competent enough to lead this roster and offense.
I would rather have Teddy Bridgewater than Zach Wilson.
I don't even think that's bold. I don't even think that's bold.
Well, the Jets should call up their division rival and be like, hey, what's Teddy Two Gloves doing when Tua gets healthy?
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Dolphins. It is, though.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Falcons and the Buccaneers now. And I got a lot to say on this one. So let's go ahead and start with Cordero Patterson. He is being placed on IR due to a knee injury. He will miss a minimum of 4 weeks. And you don't really have many good options in terms of replacing him. Caleb Huntley and Tyler Algier split the workload, 10 carries apiece. Algier had the lone reception among the two backs, so not much upside there. And then while both backs averaged above 5.5 yards per carry, Atlanta was just kind of running all over Cleveland in that game. I don't expect them to have similar success at the Buccaneers, who rank 12th in rushing yards allowed per game. Now, if you take the Kansas City just clinic that they put on the ground against Tampa Bay, if you rule that out, which they put up 189 yards in week 4, if you take away that game and you just factor in the first 3 weeks, Tampa Bay was holding opponents to fewer than 80 rushing yards a game, and there's just not a lot of upside there, especially in a committee.
Yeah, so they're usually like the best rushing defense, arguably, so that is surprising.
Yeah. I'm not advocating for any of these guys to replace Cordero Patterson, at least not this week against the Bucs. Moving on, because Atlanta was able to run so effectively, the pass catchers flopped in week 4. 3.7 fantasy points for Drake London, and I know Kyle Pitts owners are cringing at this. 3.5 points for him. Tough. That is fewer than 4 fantasy points in 3 of the first 4 games for Kyle Pitts. I do expect a bounce-back week for both of these players in a game where Tom Brady will be looking to make a statement after the disappointing home loss in week 4. But Carson, let me ask you, are you starting Pitts this week if you roster him?
That's so difficult. I don't think you can't.
Right? That's why I asked
you. You can't. I mean, if you're taking away that name and looking at those stats and what the coach has even said, you can't start him. And we both agree that he was being drafted way too high in drafts comparatively to other tight ends. Yeah. So you kind of put yourself in a corner if you drafted him, because I doubt you went and got a good backup. But I guess that's what's important. If you have someone...
Yeah, I would say if you did...
Go ahead, because I think we're going to say the same thing.
Okay. If you picked up one of those guys that we mentioned before, Tyler Higbee, or even David Njoku, or Gerald Everett, those are guys that... Tyler Conklin. Those are all guys that I would feel more comfortable starting ahead of Kyle Pitts if you want a floor.
Yeah,
if you're looking for a ceiling, roll Kyle Pitts.
Completely agree. Like, Pitts He could boom because he has that ability, but if you're needing wins, and again, it has a lot to say with your record and how you feel with the rest of your team and what you think you need to do strategically, but I would go for the floor. I mean, there are other tight ends that we've talked about, like you've said, that have better floors, for sure, than Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts is like one of the worst floors out of any tight ends, which is so surprising so far.
Yeah, well, it has a lot to do, like you mentioned, with how the coach views it. Which is just it's such a bad take. It's a real L for Arthur Smith there. Let's talk about the Buccaneers now. And this is where I get excited because, as you may or may not know, I'm a big Tom Brady fan. He finally looked like himself last week with a stat line of 39 completions on 52 attempts, 385 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Did lose a fumble on a DB blitz that just he just got blindsided, and that happens. But here's where I'm really excited. 2 of Tom's best games last season were against the Atlanta Falcons, which, by the way, 28-3. Where are you at? But in those games, he combined for 9 touchdowns and just 1 interception. You like those numbers. I expect a big game from Tom Brady, and it's nice to see that he finally has his pass catchers back. I'm going to briefly skip over the running backs here. Talk about Chris Godwin. 12.9 fantasy points, 10 targets, 7 catches, 59 yards. He looked better in this game, and honestly, I would consider him a buy low candidate because once he becomes fully healthy, fully back in the mix on this offense, we know what he's capable of as a top 15 wide receiver easily. So buy low if you can on Chris Godwin because the window is going to close sooner rather than later. Now back to the running backs. Leonard Fournette, 18.4 fantasy points on a very peculiar stat line, 3 carries for -3 yards, and 7 catches on 7 targets for 57 and a touchdown. Tampa Bay got behind early in week 4 against Kansas City and had to throw often to keep up with Mahomes. I mean, that's indicative by the 52 pass attempts from Brady. That being said, Rachaad White, who, by the way, happened to fumble the opening kickoff, giving Kansas City their first scoring drive.
Oh, that was Rachaad White?
Finished the
I didn't
game.
realize that was Rachaad White.
Yes, yes. So he finished the game with 3 carries for 6 yards and a touchdown, and then 5 catches on 5 targets for 50 yards. All 3 of his carries came in the red zone, which resulted in the short touchdown. I'm not sure what to make of that usage, but still only handled 38% of the snaps overall. So nothing to panic about yet if you roster Leonard Fournette like I do. But yeah, I mean, anything to take away from this, Carson?
It's weird, but off of one game, one had 10 touches, the other had 8. I agree. You can't just completely panic on Fournette and think that, Rachaad White's the running back. Well, no, he had the same amount of carries and just happened to get the rushing touchdown, so I agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's more indicative of how the game was going, just the game script in general.
Brady was having to sling it because they started out behind, as you said, and yeah, it was a high-scoring game.
And the thing about it too is that Tom Brady and Leonard Fournette have such a great, strong relationship that I think more often than not, Leonard Fournette's going to be his guy in the moments that he needs him. Rachaad White, as the rookie, finding his role in this offense, I'm not convinced that he is going to take this job away from Fournette anytime soon.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and pick this game. I am confidently taking the Buccaneers as 9-point home favorites. I assume that you won't be bold enough to go against me on that one.
No, I'm not going with the Falcons again. I expect a bounce back for Tampa Bay and Tampa Bay.
All right, sounds good. Let's move on to Titans at Commanders. So here we go. Ryan Tannehill completed 17 balls on 21 attempts. That's great efficiency. Got you all of 137 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. So the low-volume passing game limits upside of all pass catchers in this offense. We've been saying it all season long. This is Derrick Henry's team and 10 other guys that are just blocking for him. Treylon Burks diagnosed with turf toe. He could be placed on IR. That's not officially been done yet, but he will likely be a multi-week injury to recover from. Tennessee has a week 6 bye, so monitor his status moving forward. But honestly, with how he's performed so far this season, I would argue he's droppable. Would you agree?
Treylon Burks,
if you need the spot.
Yeah, I guess if you need the spot, I mean, this offense is just horrible.
If you're 4-0, it doesn't
this
matter.
Passing offense is
But-
horrible. So, yeah, I agree. If you need the spot, if you're 4-0, it doesn't matter because I think Traylon Burks could be promising as a rookie drafted in the first round of the real draft. But this is a gross offense. So,
Yeah.
I agree.
Cool. On to the Commanders. Carson Wentz, with back-to-back single-digit fantasy weeks, struggled at Dallas to the tune of 25 completions, 42 pass attempts, 170 yards. This is two high-flying offenses, am I right? 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. He has attempted 41 or more passes every week thus far, so that's reassuring. That's like the opposite of Ryan Tannehill. But despite the poor performance in consecutive weeks, he is still QB 10 on the season. Are you willing to start Wentz versus Tennessee this week?
Willing.
And before you answer that, let me just give the
Yeah.
context. Tennessee ranks 28th in passing yards allowed per game.
That means it's good, right? From what I remember, they're a bad passing defense. That's what that means.
I'm sorry. Yes, it means they are a bad defense against the pass.
I think that most people shouldn't be in a situation where they have to start Wentz. Maybe if their main quarterback got injured, then he was a good waiver wire pickup.
Trey Lance.
Sure. So I think in that instance, like your other guy's injured, sure. Throw Wentz out there. Hopefully he can do better. He's slinging it. That's good for fantasy. But, if you just picked him up because he was on a hot streak and you have another quarterback that maybe like a Burrow or potentially that you were lower on than you expected, he's probably not even the best example, but like you would never expect Wentz or want to start Wentz over Burrow hoping that Wentz returns to his week 1 through 3 performances.
No, weeks 1 through 2 actually, because like we said, back-to-back single-digit
1 through 2.
scoring. No, but I think it's important to note, like, home to Philadelphia in week 3 and then at Dallas in week 4, as we mentioned, those are two legit defenses. Yeah. And if Carson Wentz just rises up amongst the scrubs, then that's worth something. And I also think that there are situations like if you drafted Matthew Stafford as your QB1, you're probably looking at Carson Wentz in this matchup and being like, I'll take some of that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have waited. That's a good comparison. If you waited for Stafford as your QB1, then I think Wentz is like this premier QB2 that has risen based off his performances to start the season. Then it's a good matchup in that regard.
Are you playing Aaron Rodgers against the Giants instead of Carson Wentz?
Those are gross options. I love having Lamar Jackson because I don't have to think about this.
But that's who we need to consider. Yeah. I think the people who picked up Wentz early this year probably did have some kind of gross options and were like, hey, I'll take a flyer on this guy.
I think the context of the matchups, as you said, would make me think that you're not overreacting to want to bench that other player for Wentz. So I'm basically giving you a neutral answer. I don't think that you have to start him, but I also don't think that you are making a bad choice in starting him because of that matchup. So kind of teetering on a fence. But
all right, understood. No, that's good. Let's talk about the running backs. Antonio Gibson, who I have affectionately referred to as a punt returner since the preseason. 9.3 fantasy points. He got 13 carries for 49 yards, 3 catches on 3 targets for 14 yards. Now, despite being running back 19 on the season, Gibson has been declining in snap percentage week after week and does not look like the long-term solution at running back for the Commanders. He is averaging 3.25 roughly yards per carry for the season. A touchdown has kept him above single-digit finishes twice already. And J.D. McKissick had a season-high 8 carries this past week. The last time he did that was week 6 of 2021. Played over 50% of the snaps as well, McKissick did. This is just a bad look for Antonio Gibson, and it's coming at the worst possible time, you could argue, as Brian Robinson could be coming off the PUP. In this Week 5 matchup. Initial signs are pointing towards him getting his career debut versus Tennessee, as head coach Ron Rivera was quoted saying it looks very promising that Robinson could play Week 5. I'm advocating for monitoring his status as his ADP continued to rise throughout the preseason. With the news, they announced it, Robinson would be the team's lead back. So if Robinson's activated off the NFI, the non-football injury list, prior to this game, here's where I'm saying, okay, I know what I've said this whole segment, but here's where I'm saying, hold him on your bench. You can afford to wait one more game to see how Brian Robinson gets used, because we don't know what his workload is going to look like without any additional information to go off of. I think that he's going to end up being the better player in this backfield, the player that you're going to want to have over Antonio Gibson. I'm saying all that, but what I'm also saying is, coming off of an injury, coming off PUP, I'm not going to just thrust him out there and be like, hey, whatever he gets, it's got to be better than, blank.
Yeah.
So... and I think you would agree with me on that thought process.
Yeah.
It's just too risky to throw a rookie out there and be like, hey.
You need to see what he does, especially on a team that's been throwing the ball as much as it has.
Sure.
To just expect that this rookie running back is just now going to be the focal point of the offense is a little naive.
Yeah, and then briefly, we'll talk about Jahan Dotson dealing with a hamstring issue, which if you roster Keenan Allen, is a week-to-week type of designation. And so he is expected to miss 1 to 2 weeks, monitor his status moving forward. We're going to pick this game, and this is probably the toughest one of the day. Titans at the Commanders. I'm giving the edge to the Commanders in this one, I think, because they just seem like a more competent throwing team,
I'm
and
actually
I think
gonna have to agree. Even though this is an underdog pick for both of us,
did I convince you?
I think what you're about to rationalize is correct. I mean, if Ryan, I'm just picking a team that's throwing the ball more, and also has.
Yeah.
It's not like
neither defense is good.
No.
That's the thing. So
pick the passing.
You kind of
team.
have to.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. That's what I'm going with
And they're
here.
home.
Obviously, Derrick Henry could have a monster
Yes.
game, and it wouldn't surprise me. But I don't know if that's going to ultimately be enough for them to win the whole game. So I'm picking the Commanders with you.
With us.
All right, cool. Let's move on to the Sunday afternoon games, starting with the 49ers at the Carolina Panthers. And I know you could speak to this as someone who rosters him, but I'm going to say continue starting Jeff Wilson if you need him. He does have limited upside in PPR scoring, but he is still a flex consideration. Moving on to the pass catchers, Debo continues to play well, and hopefully San Francisco recognizes that he makes the biggest impact for their offense when he plays at wide receiver. He did get a season low of 2 carries in week 4, which I love as a manager of him. 6 catches on 7 targets for 115 yards and a touchdown, including a 57-yard catch and run for the score. Yeah,
I really
that
like
play
Debo.
was going all over social media.
I really like Debo.
No, Debo's a great guy. I like him as well. He's an exciting player to watch, and he's just he's a tough runner, and you love to see that from a wide receiver. So, on the other hand, Brandon Ayuk, 7.7 fantasy points in week 4. He is a low-end flex at best, potentially a buy low candidate, because we have seen him have mid-teen to low 20 games with Jimmy Garoppolo as quarterback on this offense. So there's upside there for sure, but we're just not seeing it from him thus far in the season. And so if you want to buy low on Brandon Ayuk, I wouldn't fault you for it, but I also think right now he's a low-end flex.
Yeah, I mean, he had a horrible start to the season last year whenever Garoppolo was at quarterback, and he kind of had a resurgence near the end, but again, still nothing like Debo was overshadowing everyone. And I know you're about to talk about Kittle, so there's more to be said about how last season went with him too. That's somewhat similar.
Yeah. So with George Kittle, another disappointing outing, 4.4 fantasy points, almost caught a touchdown, just couldn't get that second feet in bounds. You hate to see that. But yeah, I mean, what are you doing? Because I would argue this is a different situation from Kyle Pitts, because we know that San Francisco likes using Kittle when the opportunity presents itself. And I did mention that with the absence of Trent Williams, that Kittle was going to be used more as a blocker. And that seems to be the case, given that he only received 4 targets in this game. But what are your thoughts if you roster Kittle?
I mean, this is only his second game he's played this season, what he did in week 4.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Kyle Pitts comparison is worth noting because I'd be more willing to start Kittle just because of. I mean,
historical value.
He can absolutely boom,
Yeah.
and he's done it with Garoppolo at quarterbacks. And I know we say play the floor, but I think Kittle kind of gives me a little bit more confidence for sure than what Pitts has done so far this season. But again, this is why we don't play with tight ends. If you need safer points, play a Higbee, play a Njoku, someone you got the waivers.
Yeah, at this point, you know who the guys are that off waivers you can pretty confidently plug into your lineup. But again, if you're chasing upside, Kittle is a definite start. He has been shown to have 40-point weeks before, just like Hawkinson did last week. So it happens. Tight ends are inconsistent, especially, even Mark Andrews has bad games. Even Travis Kelce has had a 10-point game this season, which is not bad. I mean, people are killing
level.
for 10 points at tight end. But yeah, he's on a different. He is one of one in terms of that position. So, with Kittle, if you want upside, roll him out there. But like I said, he's going to be used more as a blocking tight end, and that hurts his value obviously in fantasy. Let's move on to the Panthers here, who are the 6.5-point underdogs at home. I don't think it's necessarily wrong given who they're going up against, but. What was Vegas smoking, having Carolina as the favorites against the Cardinals last week?
Great question, and I made it clear last week too, so that's all I'll say. It didn't surprise me.
Yeah, so this team, outside of Christian McCaffrey, who scored just under 26 fantasy points, it looks awful under Baker Mayfield. And here's the stat line. 22 completions, 36 attempts, 197 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and a fumble. The pass catchers are gasping for air, trying to keep their head above water in this offense. DJ Moore, who I think you pretty confidently had as, what was it, your wide receiver 11 for season long?
Something close to that, yeah.
He's struggling.
For sure.
11 is close to what he put up last week, 12.1. That's not horrible, but it's not what you drafted him for. It's his first game with greater than 6 targets, which is a step in the right direction. He had 11 in this one. But what do you do if you roster DJ Moore?
I think that target increase is important to note and makes you feel a little bit better. So, again, maybe a potential buy low candidate. But I expected Baker Mayfield to be competent, and he just really isn't. So, you have to live with that if you're wanting to go after more, or if you have more, that you can expect more of this from Baker Mayfield whenever he puts up a stat line like that. But at the end of the day, he is the wide receiver 1 in the offense, even if McCaffrey gets more catches than him. So there you go.
Yeah, it's a bad look for the pass catchers and just anyone involved in the pass game not named Christian McCaffrey. We are both confidently taking the 49ers in this one on the road. It doesn't bother us at all.
No.
Baker Mayfield is just a turnover machine, and he just looks bad. I mean, there's no nice way to put it, really.
A great defensive showing against the Rams last Sunday or Monday night, whatever it was. So I expect him to do
Monday
that
night,
against
yeah.
Baker.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Let's talk about Eagles at the Cardinals. This has the makings of a good game, potentially. We'll start with the Eagles, of course. Miles Sanders had an awesome day. 29.6 fantasy points. He got 27 carries, which has to be close to a career high, if not the career high. I didn't look into that, but I'm sure it's close. Maybe you can while I talk about this. But 134 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and then 2 catches on 3 targets for 22 yards. He had a season-high 67% of the snaps. This is probably the best game you could ever expect from Miles Sanders. And I want to mention Boston Scott was inactive with a rib issue last week, so this 3-headed monster turned into a 2-headed monster, and Miles Sanders carried the bulk of the carries. This is a sell-high candidate for me. I mean, 100%. The fact that he had this awesome of a game, You should be thanking him in more ways than one in terms of, yeah, thanks for doing a great job on my team. Now, please get me a good player that I can actually consistently rely upon. Because the reality is that Boston Scott will be back sooner rather than later, and this two-headed backfield returns into a three-headed backfield, and that's just not something I want to be a part of. I mean, you can stop me if I'm wrong.
I don't completely disagree.
Obviously, the Eagles... Yeah, go ahead.
10 more rushing attempts than he's had in any other game this season. You like to see that he's getting those touchdowns, but you don't want to have to rely on a running back that does that. And since he doesn't catch a lot of passes, he's caught 8 passes on the season, averaging 2 receptions per game. I don't disagree. I think that he is a sell-high candidate, but he is getting touches. But at the end of the day, you're going to get his most value for him right now. So I agree with that.
Yeah. So just to double back on what I said, this is a career high in rushes. His next highest was in Week 13 of 2021 against the Jets, where he had 24 for 120. So this is a career game for Miles Sanders, and like you were saying, a sell-high candidate that can hopefully get you someone that's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more reliable. Now, obviously, being tied to the only remaining undefeated team is nice, because it is a team that is scoring well, but remember the weeks where every running back on the team got a touchdown? Like, that's not what you want to see. Yeah. So, yeah, sell high on Sanders. Let's move on to the pass catchers. Devontae Smith, 4.7 fantasy points. His usage so far has been frustrating, to say the least. In week 1, 4 targets with no catches. In weeks 2 and 3, 7 and 12, that's a step in the right direction. And then back down to 4 targets in week 4. So it seems like it's an inconsistent boom or bust role for Smith, and it's probably not going to change. I don't see how it can, especially with A.J. Brown there. He's the alpha in the offense, and if last season's game log is any indication of things to come, he had 9 games of less than 9 fantasy points and 8 games with 10 or greater fantasy points. So that's about as boom bust as it gets, wouldn't you say?
For sure. I mean, A.J. Brown has proven to be Mr. Reliable, and Devontae Smith was coming off of NFC Offensive Player of the Week before the week where he did this. So, yes.
Of course, yeah.
Agreed.
All right, so then on to Dallas Goedert, 12.2 fantasy points, no touchdowns. That's okay at tight end. That's what we're looking for. Obviously, we love the touchdowns when they come, but in terms of consistency, Dallas Goedert remains a high floor with high ceiling upside. We've seen him, have multiple touchdown games in his career, and so that's a guy that if you drafted, you feel pretty comfortable with. Moving on to the Cardinals now. Kyler Murray had a nice bounce-back game in Week 4. 23 completions on 32 attempts, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and also rushed 12 times for 26 yards and another touchdown. I want to talk about James Conner for a little bit. 10.7 fantasy points in Week 4. He has been disappointing in his efficiency so far. Only 1 touchdown on the season does indicate that those who projected touchdown regression, like you did, they seem to have been right so far. But would you view James Conner as a buy low candidate?
I think, with all that being said, still yes. Because, he's proven to get those touchdowns, even if that's not reliable. Those opportunities are valuable, and someone who's getting the touches that he is getting, 18 touches and 10 points, that's unlucky, especially whenever he's so heavily used in goal line situations, obviously, to get that many touchdowns. So yeah, buy low, but there are things that limit Connor's ceiling that people might have thought was super high after a stretch of last season.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think buy low on Connor. He has been inefficient, but I think that probably improves over time. Now, moving on to Marquise Hollywood Brown. He's living up to that name. 20.8 fantasy points. He is unexpectedly the wide receiver 10 through 4 weeks. That has definitely exceeded my personal expectations, but we talked about this in our wide receiver rankings video during preseason, that while Hopkins is serving his 6-game suspension, we do expect Hollywood to have more usage and more production in this offense because, who's he competing against? The ghost of A.J. Green, obviously an aging Zach Ertz, and Rondale Moore, who has really not been healthy up until last week. And then no one was talking about Greg Dortch, who, by the way, fell into obscurity once again, despite AJ Green not playing last week.
I think it had to be Rondale Moore, even though he didn't do a whole lot, just that he played 86% of snaps. But yeah.
Yeah, yes, Dortch's usage completely plummeted, and I think he is safely droppable moving forward. Yeah. But yeah, Hollywood Brown, here's the question. Can he keep up this production through the next 2 weeks? And then what happens once Hopkins re-enters the mix?
I do worry because, Hollywood Brown has been this boom-bust player in his career, with Mark Andrews being the other best pass catcher on his team. So what happens when he gets a very talented player next to him in DeAndre Hopkins, who has somehow become touchdown dependent himself? There's, like you've said, there's a lot of mouths to feed. So I don't know if he can't keep up this production target-wise, but I think he could still be reliable in your lineup. How about that?
I know, but 39 targets over the past 3 games is pretty insane. Yeah. I mean, I think you're getting very close to your window for selling high on Marquise Brown closing.
Oh, for sure.
And that's what I'm concerned about, because I think once Hopkins does return, he kind of does demand more of those targets. And, Marquise Brown's numbers are going to go down inevitably. So I think your window is closing, and so just be warned on that. Carson, who are you picking in this one?
Oh, come on. I think it has to be the Eagles, although somehow there's a part of me that wants to pick the Cardinals, but I'm not going to go against the undefeated team in this one. If you want to differ with me, go for it.
I don't particularly. I would really consider it if Hopkins were back, but he's just not yet, and so I'm gonna give the edge to the team that's been playing hot. I mean, especially Arizona has just not looked good in most of their games. They got lucky against the Raiders, I would say, and they should probably be a worse record than they are currently. And so I'm going with you there. I think that's not the hill that I'm looking to die on.
Agreed.
All right, let's move on to Cowboys at the Rams. If you thought that Matthew Stafford was going to get a break from the pass rush, Micah Parsons would like a word with you. But let's talk about the offensive guys here. Cooper Rush remains undefeated as the starter. Now, I'm seeing a lot of, we'll call it malarkey to keep it family friendly, about Cooper Rush. It's a nice story, but when Dak Prescott's healthy, I don't think Cooper Rush is going to be competing for the starting role. I mean, would you disagree?
I don't disagree. I think that, that whole tweet of Cooper Rush better watch out, who's going to go play for the Panthers, might be the most realistic outcome out of all these.
That is more realistic.
Yeah. He's competent backup, but at the end of the day, he's not a game changer. He just isn't. So
no, it's really on the back of the defense that the Cowboys are finding success in his tenure at starting QB.
He hasn't. He's thrown. Oh my gosh! I'm just looking at the stats now. He's thrown 4 passing touchdowns in 3 games, and it's only in his highest. That's not horrible, but it's not like what people should be praising so adamantly. And the most passing completions he's had in a game is 21, and he hasn't thrown for more than 235 yards. What are people talking about? He hasn't thrown an interception. So there you go. Competent backup. That's what it is.
Yeah. I don't want to get you too riled up on this. We're nearing the end of this, but who it's certainly not on the back of, as we've already said, it's the defense. It's not the running backs. Ezekiel Elliott, 10.1 fantasy points. Here's a very inefficient day. 19 carries for 49 yards. 2 catches for 32 yards on 2 targets as well. Zeke continues to struggle, averaging just over 2.5 yards per carry against a pitiful Washington run defense that was allowing over 120 rushing yards per game through the first 3 weeks. So Okay, maybe Zeke struggled, but how about Tony Pollard? He probably did well, right? Nope. 1.8 fantasy points, 8 carries for 6 yards, and 1 catch on 3 targets for 2 yards. This is 3 consecutive weeks of fewer than 45% of the snaps for Pollard. What do you do if you roster, and I know you love these questions, what do you do if you roster either of these running backs, or, get this, how about both of them?
Can't ever start Pollard if Zeke is healthy 100%, and you probably have to start Zeke because 21 touches is hard to throw on your bench.
Hey. Try to, chin up.
No, because I had both of them last season,
in your voice.
and we talked about it almost every single week in these episodes. Yeah. So it's honestly a carbon copy of the latter half of last season, and it's disappointing. They should be thanking their defense, as you've said many times, for their outcomes.
So you're saying you should keep starting Zeke and keep Pollard on your bench?
I think you have to, for the reasons I've said. Although I'm not excited about having shares in this backfield whatsoever.
Yeah,
as you can tell.
Certainly not. Certainly not. And then I want to quickly talk about Dalton Schultz. He disappointed, obviously. 0 fantasy points, no catches on 3 targets. You don't like that at all. Going from 9 targets in week 1 to 4 targets in week 2, which that was the game he left late, and then 3 in week 4 with 0 catches, as we just said. Now, obviously, we talked about how a strained MCL can be a limiting injury, but what should you do if you roster Dalton Schultz?
I think that these tight end questions. I would like to think that this is a blip in his return from injury, and that Cooper Rush targeted him a lot in the game where he came in week 1. So I would think that this is.
Well, but it's fair to say that Dak Prescott played the vast majority of that game. So it really wasn't a lot of Cooper Rush targets, if I remember correctly.
I think he did still target him, but it was, yes. I mean, it wasn't just because of Cooper Rush, of course. But I think that...
Just wanted to get that out there.
I think that this is not a fair representation of what Schultz should be doing in this offense, of course. So, but again, throwing someone back into your starting lineup after 0 points, you're never that excited about doing that. But...
Yeah, so I'll say this. As someone who rosters Schultz in a league, I'm going to start Tyler Conklin again ahead of him because I made the mistake last week of benching Conklin in favor of Schultz because Schultz was quote-unquote healthy and back. I'm going to keep him out of my lineup until he proves himself moving forward because you can't take a 0 at tight end. You can't take a 0 at any position, but it's just... I have somebody who has a higher floor right now, and so I'm going to roll with the guy that I trust a little bit more right now. There's a bug flying in my room if you keep seeing me wave my hand around. With Schultz, I'm holding him out until he kind of plays his way back into the starting lineup. And let's go ahead and move on to the Rams here, who... I think we can safely say Matthew Stafford has a crush on Cooper Kupp. Obviously, we saw that last season, but he has a newfound love for Tyler Higbee. 14 targets last week. Cooper Kupp getting 19 targets. He doesn't seem to be getting enough time to make any other reads. The Rams allowed 7 sacks last week, Monday night, and... So, the end of last week. But either way, the offense failed to score a single touchdown. It was 3 field goals for them against the 49ers. The running backs, obviously playing from behind all game prevents Henderson and Akers from having much impact on the ground. But, I mean, is this matchup any better for them? I would argue no. So, I'm probably benching both of those guys if I can. And then when it comes to Allen Robinson, I know this is a sore spot for you because you roster him, but 2.7 fantasy points in week 4, 2 catches on 6 targets for 7 yards. He has been below 4.5 fantasy points in 3 of 4 games. And I'm sure you would take almost any offer. Is Allen Robinson a buy low candidate for you?
I sure hope so because that means his value will increase. I don't know. I think that there are so many troubling things that I've read, like Sean McVay saying, uh, it's been out of Robinson's control, his lack of production. What does that even mean?
Well, I think it could be tied to the offensive line.
Okay, that's fair.
Which I referenced. Like, I mean, you can't give up that many sacks and expect, secondary or even tertiary reads to be like, Stafford doesn't have enough time to develop plays like down the field routes, and I think that might be actually fair analysis from the coach there, because if they're not blocking for Stafford, he's going to be making quick reads to his most trusted guys, which are the guys that have been around on the offense longer. Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee.
Okay. I'm feeling better.
And then, I don't think that's far off base, but how does it improve? That's the real concern.
And I will say that there's been some explanations, and we talked about this last week, but here we go again. Week 1 against the Bills, 7 sacks, so you get why Robinson had a great game. Week 2, he caught a touchdown, so that was good. Week 3, he didn't do well, of course, and Stafford only had 18 completions, and then week 4 allowed 7 sacks. So, there's been reasons every single time. So your analysis of what McVay said, if that even is a real quote, I'm pretty sure I read that, but
just made it up.
Could make you feel better, and maybe can't
I
imagine
think,
that
here's what I'll say,
anyone's going to leverage Robinson too hard against you if you're wanting to go after him. So.
Yeah, I think Robinson's value is pretty much at its minimum for the season. I don't see it getting much lower, barring injury. But Allen Robinson, I think, is a buy low candidate. If you're 4-0, take a flyer on him, and if he does develop in this offense, maybe they sign a free agent or make a trade for an offensive lineman that can make an impact on the team, make that final playoff push for Aaron Donald to get that second Super Bowl ring. I think that's entirely within the realm of possibilities for Allen Robinson and this team. That being said, I don't know if you're with me on this, but I'm picking the Cowboys to win this one on the road.
I think I am with you. And I'm sorry for any sort of discrepancy.
I was hoping, I know.
But
I'm looking for edge. I'm looking to make that back, but hopefully my Patriots
every
hold
single
up
time they've played a good defense,
they've been bad.
They've been bad.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. These are your two final games to talk about, so I'll go ahead and hand the mic back over to you, so to speak.
Yeah. So, Bengals at Ravens, Sunday Night Football. I don't have a whole lot to say from either team because almost every single player on the Bengals performed at their projection, so it's like, okay, in their Thursday night matchup against the Dolphins last week. But one person that did overperform was T. Higgins, 25.4 fantasy points. He had a touchdown and 124 receiving yards, so that's great for Higgins. But Jamar Chase, 12.1 fantasy points, 4 receptions on 6 targets, 81 yards. I mean, not a horrible game, but not performing where you drafted him at. So I'm not going to make too big of a deal out of this because the Bengals themselves have had a slow start, and you're of course not benching Chase, but you are a little bit disappointed with his production thus far. You got anything else to add? Because everyone else that you're starting in the Bengals is doing what they should be doing, at least.
Yeah, I would say that I'm a little concerned with how Joe Mixon's running the ball. He's been pretty inefficient, and that's a little concerning for me if I roster him.
He's got great volume,
I don't know off the top of my head.
It's that volume.
Well, I know that's the thing.
Horrible yards per carry, but great volume.
Volume. Right, volume and talent is what we look for. And Mixon has both, but I don't know. It's still a little concerning to me. So
it has been weird.
I don't know off the top of my head where the Ravens rank against the run this far in the season, but I know they've been giving up a lot of yards through the air, and that's where the Bengals are most strong. So I think it's going to be a good week for those starters. If you just want to throw a dart, I wouldn't be afraid of starting or flexing Tyler Boyd if you need him, because I think this would be a good matchup for that. But we know that Tyler Boyd is inconsistent, so I'm not putting my stamp of approval on that call. I'm just saying if you need it, it's a good matchup. It's worth a shot.
Yeah, and divisional matchup I'd even mention, so that in prime time, so make it even better game potentially. Ravens, though, I'll transition to monitor Rashad Bateman's foot injury, which is deemed as day-to-day. Although he hasn't really been that exciting ever since getting his 2 big receiving touchdowns in the first 2 weeks. But keep an eye on that. And the Ravens really didn't have a lot of great pass catchers perform well fantasy-wise. So the only real thing to pull from this that was big was J.K. Dobbins had 22.3 fantasy points, playing 50% of snaps, which was more than his season debut in Week 3. He had 13 carries.
Yeah, but he found the end zone twice.
Yes, found the end zone twice on 17 touches. So I guess, your skepticism that you might have brought up. How you feeling about Dobbins after a performance like this?
I'm not convinced, obviously.
Yeah.
I think the touchdown equity there is probably higher than we should expect, especially with Lamar Jackson as his quarterback. I mean, Lamar is he's liable to break off a couple rushing touchdowns himself, and that lowers the upside for Dobbins in that offense. There's also rumblings of Gus Edwards kind of re-emerging and getting healthy, and he's going to be taking touches away from Dobbins. Honestly, I was not high on Dobbins, and we talked about this in our rankings video and our mock draft, that, Dobbins is not a guy that I'm really comfortable drafting. Obviously, starting the season just last week for him, his first game. But yeah, I don't feel good about it. That's all I'll say.
And to give some general context for all the pass catchers, because I kind of mentioned that earlier, Lamar didn't really... He did it as like his average completions, average attempts. He's actually been really consistent. He just wasn't very efficient in this game with those completions. Only threw 1 passing touchdown and 2 interceptions. That's the most interceptions he's thrown this season in a game, and the least touchdowns he's thrown. So, and it was against the Bills, so keep that in mind. But for this game, I'm picking the Ravens, which might...
Okay, that's a convincing pick there. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick the Bengals in this one, and here's why. Their offensive line looked really good in Week 4. On Thursday night, they had a very, very strong outing. Now, granted, the Miami Dolphins do not have the most formidable pass rush, but honestly, I don't think the Ravens do either. So if the Bengals' offensive line can hold up, I think they are the better team. And it's just going to be a matter of containing Lamar, as we've seen.
I don't know.
I know. He's an X factor, but if I think the Bengals can keep up with him at the very worst. And I was going to say the Bengals have one of the best kickers, but so do the Ravens. So this one could go down to the wire. It wouldn't surprise me in the least bit. But just for the excitement of Sunday Night Football and the fact that I do believe if the offensive line holds up, I'm picking the Bengals against
Yeah, I think this is definitely one I could lose, but I'm not going to switch. We'll move on to Monday Night Football. Last game we'll talk about. Raiders at Chiefs divisional matchup. So with the Raiders, Josh Jacobs boomed 34.5 fantasy points. I think this has got to be like career high on a lot of these. 28 carries, 144 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 5 receptions on 6 targets for 31 yards, 89% of snaps. I have legit question mark right here, and I know you said you wanted to elaborate on that potential question, so I'll let you do that. Is this legit?
Yeah, so here's what I'll say. Obviously, the snap percentage is a very reassuring statistic that we can pull from, but this is also probably a season-high game for Josh Jacobs. Yeah. So is it legit? Well, sort of. He's not going to do this week in and week out. But he's also, the thing that I really like is that he's been getting involved in the passing game in the last 2 weeks. 5 targets and 6 targets last week, and then 5 catches in each game. That's where I think he kind of makes his money on your fantasy team, in PPR scoring, of course. But I don't know. I mean, I guess the question is is he going to remain RB7 for the whole year? Probably not. So from that perspective, he's not legit, but I think you have to hold him. I don't think he's a sell high. I'll say it that way.
I think that's fair analysis. I mean, for someone who's probably your RB2, 33 touches is incredible. Not sustainable, as you've said, but the fact that he got involved in the passing game a little bit, 5 receptions, that's better than what he's done in the past, so that's reassuring. And, I mean, this is not looking like the player that they threw out in the what do they even call it? That first preseason game.
Hall of Fame
game. Yeah, obviously they care about him a little bit more than they showed back then. So, there you go.
Yeah, and just a fun fact for you, his career high rushing attempts came in Week 8 of 2020, where he had 31 for 129.
Wow.
And that's just an awesome thing about Sleeper. Not that we're sponsored, but
sponsor us, please.
The game log, the player history. Oh, yeah, I would love that. But yeah, just a cool little feature that you can look through the history of players and pull stats from the past. It's
for
pretty
sure.
Cool. Let's talk about the pass catchers.
Yeah, I'm only really going to highlight Darren Waller here because Davante Adams was Davante Adams, and you're always going to start him.
And will continue to be Davante Adams.
Hunter Renfrow was inactive, which means the stat line for Darren Waller is even more troubling. Who played 80% of snaps, so he was out there. 5.4 fantasy points, 3 receptions on 5 targets for 24 yards. I've had question marks about his usage, so I'll ask you if you're panicking on him. So I hear you have an opinion.
Yeah, so I'll say this, and I know it's not the most sophisticated take, but can we just chalk it up to him being a tight end and move on? Like,
but this guy has been
to,
super consistent in the past.
I know,
but, Davante Adams is there now, so.
But I really think that, like, I genuinely believe that for most teams, the tight end is being phased out of the offense. Like, that's really what it feels like. And
got phased out of our fantasy
I know.
leagues. That's all I know.
Yeah, it definitely did, and we don't miss them. I mean, you guys that are listening and watching this, come over to this side of the game. It's a lot more fun to not have a guy in your lineup that gets 5 points every single week, or a guy that gets 7 points most of the time. Yeah. It's just like, I don't know. But to me, I'm not panicking on Darren Waller. He is similar to a George Kittle or a Dalton Schultz or a TJ Hawkinson. I mean, they have high ceilings and occasionally low floors. That's just kind of that's the reality of it. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not panicking, but in this matchup, I'm starting him. I'll just say that.
Yep, I think that's fair. I'll move on to the Chiefs, though. Mahomes, Kelsey connection is as strong as ever. They scored maybe on the first play very quickly after they recovered that fumble on the opening kickoff.
Yeah, it was quick after.
No other pass catcher really boomed. I mean, Kelsey is the wide receiver 1, even though he's a tight end in this offense. So it's just the pass catcher 1. So we'll do what we always do. Talk about CEH, because this kind of goes against the grain of what we're saying, although it still fits the sell high narrative. 22.4 fantasy points, but this time he had 19 carries for 92 yards and a rushing touchdown and a catch. He had 22 carries combined in the 3 games before this one, so 19 is definitely much better, but it's also the least he was involved in the passing game, and as you already showcased, the Buccaneers' rush defense was just really bad in this game. So how are we feeling about CEH this week?
Well, I would say this. I think that, if anything, this just kind of bolsters the idea that you should sell high on him because of that statement you said, 22 rushes through the first 3 weeks.
Yeah.
That's a concerning statistic. Obviously, he's tied to a high-powered offense, much like Miles Sanders. And, I ranked these guys very close to each other in the running back rankings video. It's just not the kind of player that I'm interested in rostering. To me, it only takes a few weeks without any touchdowns, which will happen eventually, that will really he will stick out on your lineup as a liability when those games come, and they're going to come. That's the reality of it. So CEH, I'm going to continue to advocate for selling high. It's just, to me, it's just not a headache that I want to deal with once those touchdowns stop coming.
If he has another game with this rushing usage and carry total next week, maybe we'll change our script, but
might change our mind.
I do agree.
Yeah.
Just comparatively to the first 3 weeks. So that wraps it up.
Okay. I'll go ahead and close us out here. Thank you all so much for watching or listening. We are on YouTube. We are on all podcast platforms, And so check us out wherever you are. If you want the video format, we are on YouTube, obviously. And if you happen to stop by, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be doing this all season long. So we'll see you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Peace out.